Housing affordability is top of mind for everybody right now, and no demographic more so than first-time home buyers who are just trying to get into the market. There's this thing launched a while back called the First Home Savings Account, and it was an effort by the federal government to help eligible Canadians save for their first home. Is it working? Who's it benefiting? Heather Scoffield has some views on that. Her organization, the Canadian Tax Observatory, is a nonprofit. They conduct a bunch of independent research, and they had some interesting insights in terms of how that program was being used and who was benefiting. She joins us now to talk about that insight. Hello there, Heather.
Hi, Bruce.
So the first home savings account, it's a big deal for a first-time home buyer. They probably know all the ins and outs of it. But for those of us who are past that stage, what should people know in terms of how it works?
So it's very popular for a good reason. It says tax-free on the way in, tax-free on the way out. So it kind of acts like a combination of an RRSP when you put your money in, and a TFSA when it grows in the savings account, and then when you take it out, it's the growth is tax-free.
Yeah.
So it's got a bunch of benefits to it. What you can do is put $8,000 a year into the account for up to a maximum of 40,000. And you can keep it in there for 15 years. And during that time, you can take it out and put it on your house. And that's when you get the tax benefit on taking it out. But if you don't take it out, you can put it into your RRSP. And I mean, there are tax implications for that, but there are no space implications for your RRSP when you take it out. So it's pretty attractive to anybody that's got a bit of extra money.
What was the original intention when this was launched? What was the idea?
So in 2021, there was a federal election campaign, and the Liberals made a campaign promise there, as parties tend to do during their election campaigns, and especially around housing and affordability was top of mind then. And they promised that they would have a savings vehicle that would target young first home buyers and help them save for a house. So it was very much put forward as a generational equity play, helping young people. When they actually put it into place in 2023, the rules were a bit different than what they promised during the election campaign. They opened up the age. I mean, they didn't have any age restriction, and so they still argued that it would be targeted at young people and still help with the generations. And then, it came into place, and now it's the program's about 2 years old, and we see it's become a mainstay, right? We see advertising for it everywhere. People talk about it. FHSA, everybody kind of knows what you
Yeah.
mean a little bit anyway. It's mainstream.
And yet, your report would argue that it's not necessarily helping the people who need it most. Tell us what you found.
Yeah. So we looked at who was contributing and by income level and how much they were contributing. And so, yes, there are young people of modest means using the account to save up, but there are also people of all ages. There's a whole cohort of remarkably older people that are using it. The only requirement, is not an age requirement. It's that you haven't owned a house for 4 years before. So you might not even be a first home buyer. You might be your 10th house, but if you haven't owned anything for the last 4 years, you can qualify. So there are people of all ages jumping in there, and there are people of all income levels. So the higher your income goes, the more you have to put in the account, and people who have high income are maxing out on that, on putting as much in there as they possibly can. The other thing that we found is kind of two steps removed, which is where are those young people getting their money from to fill up the account if they're not making much money, or even if they are? So where does it all come from? And it looks like it's coming a lot from the Bank of Mom and Dad. There are a lot of, I think the Bank of Canada and CMHC have both done research on this and found that, about 40% of first home buyers get money from their parents, and a lot of those people are using the FHSA as well. So it looks like, to me anyway, that we've got a lot of parents that are using the tax shelter to put the money over to their kids, and they're using it to buy a house.
The
So
reason we're having this conversation is because I hadn't thought about that. It hadn't even occurred to me until I saw that. It was like, oh, okay, right. Is this a gap in the design of the account itself? Should we have predicted this based on what was launched a couple years ago?
I think that it's an obvious pattern in my opinion. I mean, we've seen like the income levels. It doesn't surprise me at all that richer people have the ability to take their extra money and put it into a savings account. We've seen the same pattern over the years with RESPs and RRSPs and
Right.
TFSAs. All those savings vehicles are heavily tilted towards high income earners. So yeah, we should have completely have expected that. The bank of mom and dad channeling the money through. I mean, that's a phenomenon that's increasing more and more. The Bank of Canada showed that early in the 2000s it was a thing, but it wasn't a huge thing, and then it's become a very, very regular thing for young people to lean on their parents for the down payment. So that was building, and it probably should have been anticipated. I don't know if there's any particular way that you can prevent that from happening, or should we? But it's worth noting that it is a phenomenon. And if the goal here, the public policy goal here, is to help people who wouldn't normally be able to afford it to be able to save for a home and get a down payment, it doesn't look to me like that's really happening,
Right.
because the people that are filling up their accounts to the max there are the people who already can afford it.
And as we, broaden the lens or the aperture to include other accounts like the RDSP, which is a focus on family members with a disability, or something like the Canada Learning Bond, which tries to provide a little bit of a lift for families who don't have the amount for an RESP. Are there other policy suggestions that might make the first home savings account more accessible or more effective for lower income Canadians who don't have the bank of mom and dad?
Yeah, so how do we make this system more progressive? And how we did it with the RESP was, I mean, yeah, they added a learning bond, so an actual grant to people in low income. And I've have a hard time getting my head around that for housing. And we're actually going to give people money for a down payment. Um, but I think we need to reflect on why it is we're offering. Let's look at the top end. Why is it that the government's offering these tax incentives for people who have a lot of means? Why are we giving them yet another tax-free
Mm.
shelter to help them grow their money? Meanwhile, that there's a whole bunch of talk about supply and building more homes and affordable housing. Like that's probably, if for me, that's where I'd lean to actually make the housing market more balanced. You increase the supply rather than egging on the demand, which is
Right.
what's happening here. That just makes prices go up.
Your background as an economics reporter is really coming to bear here. You use the word progressive, and in a political context, that has certain connotations. You mean it in an economic context. Can you explain
I
more
do.
about what that word means in this context?
Sure, like progressive taxes is what we have in income tax, for example, that the richer you are, the higher percentage you pay in tax up to a certain level. I mean, our tax system is quite progressive up to a certain level of income. But it means it's graded for how if you're at the lower end of the income spectrum, you have a beneficial system, less so than if you're richer.
Yeah. So the first home savings account is one of the tools. What are the other tax related tools that the various levels of government have access to in order to help this affordability issue that is being felt coast to coast to coast?
So we looked at there's tax expenditures, which are kind of boutique tax measures that the government has, and they list them every year. They measure them, figure out how much money they're foregoing, how much revenue they're foregoing, and it looks like on housing alone that they're foregoing $17 billion in taxes every year, and that's not including the GST rebate on homes that's just going through right now. Um, so there are a whole bunch of measures that are out there for all various things, incentives for people in different segments of society. The big one there is I mean, it's tax. There's on your principal residence, it's capital gains free, right? So that's the big one. Um, there are a whole bunch of other programs though that are not captured in that $17 billion. And they're provincial programs too, and the problem, I think, here is from a public policy perspective is that there's a wide recognition that housing has become unaffordable. Even with the recent softening in the markets, it's still out of reach for many, many people and out of whack with their salaries and what they're earning. And we've got we've just been throwing the kitchen sink at this problem election after election, right? It's very political. And it's a lot easier to throw things at the demand side so people get money in their pockets, but it really doesn't help in the long run. So, we do have, we're definitely more focused on supply lately, especially on the affordable housing side. And that may, if we can build fast enough, it may it may pick up. But again, that's all embroiled in municipal and provincial politics. We hear it all the time, people talking about development charges and so forth. So it's a dog's breakfast.
Mm.
And it would be really great, I think, to see something more coherent with a policy goal in mind rather than a bunch of different competing goals and have governments work together in that direction.
Just before we go, I want to ask you about the Canadian Tax Observatory. I was unfamiliar with it, though we've spoken in the past in your role as an economics reporter at the biggest publications in the country. What should people know about your organization and what you're trying to do?
So it's pretty new. I was hired to lead and build the Canadian Tax Observatory just starting last September. Research oriented and public engagement, and really what I'm hoping to do is things like this, things like changing the public conversation around tax to make it more accessible, and also to recognize that everybody has an interest in what happens with their taxes and what they're spent on. So the observatory is very much focused on research, fact-based, and public engagement around tax policy that's pro-growth, pro-equality, and pro-simplicity. And that's a bunch of words, but if you start thinking about it, they all compete with each other in trying to design a tax system. It ends up being very complicated.
Right.
But that's why we have to have a conversation about it. If it were easy, we would just be, I
Right.
wouldn't exist.
Right. Right. Well done. Heather, thank you for joining us to talk about this. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Heather Scoffield is the CEO of the Canadian Tax Observatory, and she was here to talk about the First Home Savings Account and some insight from a study that they completed on just who is getting the biggest bang for their buck.